Welcome to this Wisel Power BI tutorial. In this video we'll look at how to import and transform data from PDF files. We'll start by looking at how to import a simple table from a PDF, before moving on to look at how to transform data in the query editor. We'll start with some simple techniques such as changing data types, removing rows and creating headers, before moving on to some of the more advanced techniques such as merging or appending queries, transposing or unpivoting tables, and we'll finish off with a quick look at how to create new calculated columns. So quite a lot to do in this one, let's get started. To begin with, we'll need a sample PDF file that we can load into a report. The source I'll use for this video is the BFI website. They produce a statistical yearbook as a PDF file, which contains all sorts of data about the year in film. There's a single compiled version of all the data in the yearbook download, but that's also separated out into different chapters, and as we don't need all the data for a simple video like this, we'll just go with the first separate chapter called Film at the Cinema. We could also just shortcut this and go straight for the Excel source file, but that would kind of defeat the object of a video which is designed to show you how to extract data from a PDF. So maybe look at that in your own spare time, but for now I'm going to go for the Film at the Cinema PDF file. I'll load that first by clicking on the link, and then I'll download a local copy of this by clicking the download button up in the top right hand corner, and I'll save this to my desktop. This file contains lots of tables to import. The first one we're going to go for is on page number 11. If I quickly navigate to page number 11 by typing the page number in at the top and then press enter, the table we're going to import first of all is this basic one here. It shows data about the films released outside the top 100 films for the last 10 years. So to get access to that in a Power BI report, what we can do is, from a brand new blank report, I'm currently running the June 2019 update, by the way. I'm going to choose to get data. Now I'll find the PDF connector in the main list of connector types. So I can choose get data and then select PDF and click connect. I can then browse to where I've stored my files, that's on my desktop, and I can simply double click to connect to that file. Then the navigator will start analysing the file and working out the pages and the tables in that file. It takes quite a while if you've got the full yearbook downloaded, but this one was relatively quick. So let's scroll down to find page number 11. I'll just highlight the table first to check that it's the one that I want, and that looks pretty good. Then I can check the box to choose to import it. Rather than just loading the data directly into the data model, it might be worthwhile tidying this up a bit in the query editor. So I might want to give the table a better name than table 25, and I'd want to change some of my column headings as well. So column 1 should be called year, and then it looks like I'm missing some text from the other column headings, maybe from some text wrapping features in the PDF document. So rather than loading this, let's click the edit button and then work out what sorts of things we can do to tidy this data up a little bit. I'll start by changing the table name. I can do that using the name property in the top of the right hand window over here. So I can change from table 25, let's call this box office outside top 100. Bit of a long-winded name, but it's definitely better than table 25. I'll hit enter to confirm that. Then I can rename some of my columns. So column 1, if I double click the column heading there, that can become year. Then number of releases, it looks as though all my column title has come back now. The text wrapping seems to have disappeared. But I think if I double click the column heading, the text wrapping or the line break is still in place. So let's just rename this so it's number of releases and make sure that the header stays on a single line. I'll just shorten the gross box office column header a bit as well. So let's double click that. Let's call that gross box office and then pound M rather than pound millions. And then I'll delete the medium box office column entirely. I don't need that. I can right click and choose remove. The data types of the columns look sensible. So decimal number for gross box office and whole numbers for number of releases and year. So at that point I can click close and apply to confirm my changes and load this data into my data model. And then when that's finally happened, I can have a quick check on the data view to make sure it looks sensible there. One quick thing I'll do with the year column, it's set to, because it's a numeric field, Power BI automatically sets it to be summarized automatically. So whenever it's added into a visual, it will sum the year, which is a bit silly. The year is more of a category than it is a value. So what I'm going to do is highlight the year column, and then in the modeling tab in the ribbon, I can change its default summarization to say don't summarize. Having done that, I can head back to the report view, and let's create a basic visual. I'll go for a simple line and clustered column chart. And then I'll add in the year field. That will go into the shared axis box. I'll check the gross box office column, which will go into the column values box, and I'll just resize the chart a little bit. I will then add in the number of releases manually by dragging it into the line values box. So when I do that, the line appears. It looks as though that there are no releases in 2009. It's just that the secondary axis is starting at the value 400 rather than at 0. So what I'm going to do while I'm here is head to the Format panel using the Paint Roller tool on the right-hand side. I'll expand the Y-axis box, and then, or the Y-axis card, I should say, as Microsoft's terminology uses. Then I'll scroll down this section to find the Y-axis line section, and then the start value, type in a 0 and press enter, and then the line will, the secondary y-axis will start at 0, raising the line to make it look like some films were released in the year 2009. Okay, so that was a fairly simple example. There wasn't much tidying up of that table to do at all. So let's go with something a little more challenging. Let's import a table that needs a little more tidying up. If I head back to the PDF file in Chrome, I can scroll upwards to page 8. And on page 8 is a table that looks kind of similar. It's a table that shows the box office for the last 10 years. This one's the total UK box office though, rather than just films in the top 100. Sorry, outside the top 100. So I want to import this table as well and create a similar sort of chart based on that. So if I switch back to Power BI Desktop, to import my data this time, I don't need to go through the Get Data button. I can go to Recent Sources and just choose the file I've just used. So I can select that file, and then when the dialog box appears, I need to look for page 8 on the left-hand side first of all, and I'll need to select the table with the data in it. That's the one. Table 19, another clever name for the table. You can hopefully see here already that this is a little messier than the previous table. So let's see, let's check the box to import that. Then let's head straight to the query editor by clicking the edit button, and then wait for the data to load and the query editor to load. And then we can look at what changes we need to make here to tidy this up. Let's start by renaming the table as we did last time. So table 19 is an equally rubbish name as table 25 was. Let's call this Box Office All Films, and then hit enter to rename it. We've got some column headings in there already, but they're currently sitting in the first row of data. So let's promote that first row into the column headers. We can do that by clicking the Use First Row as Headers button on the toolbar. And then we can just rename some of these columns to make sure they make sense. Let's rename Box Office Gross, so that that's called Gross Box Office pound M, so it matches the column heading from the other table. Let's also change the change on previous. Let's just call that change from previous year. Give it a more obvious title, change from previous year. And then the change since 2008, I don't really care about at all. I'm going to right click and remove that column altogether. Now I'm left with two rows of data that I don't need, so the top one and the bottom one row. So I can choose to remove those rows by using the Remove Rows button. I can choose Remove Top Rows and then enter the value 1 in the dialog box and click OK. And then do exactly the same thing to remove the one bottom row. So I can choose Remove Rows, Remove Bottom Rows, type in number 1 and hit OK there as well. At this point I can start changing some of my data types. You can see that the data is still being treated as text. So let's change year into a whole number, and then we'll change gross box office pounds millions into a whole number. And then we can try to do the same thing for change from previous year. This should be a decimal number, so let's change it to a decimal number. Except that results in an error. And the reason for the error, if I just go back to the previous step, hopefully you can see, is that the minus symbol there, the dash, can't be converted into a number, so it provides us with an error. If I select the change to type 2 option again, it shows me that error comes back. So I should really make sure that I've cleaned up that minus symbol before I attempt to change the types. Now what I'd ordinarily do here is probably delete the step I've just added and then clean up that data and then reapply the changed type. But because I don't want to have to go through that process again, what I'm going to attempt to do is insert a step in between the last two. This is something that Power BI or Power Query doesn't really like you doing because it can easily break your entire query step sequence. But I think we'll be safe just doing this very simple change. Let's right click the change from previous year column, and what I would like to do is choose to replace values. You get a little warning about inserting steps, as I've just described. This could break the entire query, so I'm pretty confident. Let's click insert, and then what we would like to do is we'd like to find a dash, a hyphen, a minus symbol, so we can type that into the box. We could choose to replace that with either nothing or maybe with a 0. I think we'll replace it with nothing, that there wouldn't be a change at all. There should be no value indicated for 2008. I don't want to indicate that it was the same as the previous year, so let's make it empty or null. If I do click OK here at this point, just watch what happens to the negative numbers. They will all be converted into positive numbers, which wasn't quite what I wanted. So I'm going to go back to the cog icon on the replaced value step. So over here at the right hand side, a little tiny icon to edit that step. That will bring back my dialog box. I can then head to the advanced options and then choose to match entire cell contents. If I then click OK, then the negative numbers remain as negative numbers, but the single minus or dash or hyphen disappears from that first cell. At that point, I can click back on change to type 2, and that should go back to that step with the values all successfully converted to decimal numbers. So now I can close and apply those changes by clicking the appropriate button on the Home tab of the ribbon, and that will take me back to the Reports view and apply the changes. And eventually I will see my new table appears on the right hand side. Now if I expand my box office all films table, the new one, and I try to drag in, let's try to drag in the gross box office for all films into my chart. If I select the chart first and then choose gross box office dollars and add that into the column values. Now, hopefully, as you'd expect, the gross box office for all the films, including those outside the top 100, is significantly larger than those for just outside the top 100. But the important thing here is that we're still seeing sensible values. You can hopefully see that the columns have different values for each year. They match what you'd expect to see from the raw data. And the reason that's happening is because if I switch onto the model view, I've imported my second table, and Power BI Desktop has decided that those tables should be related in some way. It's recognised a column with the same name and the same values with a single value in each table, which matches. You can see it's joined the year field to the year field with a 1-to-1 relationship. If we didn't have that relationship, let me just delete it. I can right click on that relationship and choose delete, and then I'll confirm that I wanted to do that, and then I can head back to the report view. You can see here hopefully that things are clearly not working properly. All I've got for my second dataset now is the total box office for the entire table. There's no sort of connection from the year in the second dataset to the year in the first. So back into the model view, I can create that relationship manually by just clicking and dragging between year and year, and then that creates that 1-to-1 relationship again. In some cases, as we've just demonstrated, this auto creation of relationships can be quite handy. It means we didn't have to come and create this relationship ourselves manually. In other situations, the reverse is true. If you have to continually delete relationships that you didn't need, it can be a bit of a pain. So you can change for each individual file whether you want relationships to be created automatically or not. To do that, I can head to the File menu and choose Options and Settings, and then Options. And then in the dialog box, which will finally appear, In the current file section, there's a data load option. And in the data load option, I can uncheck the auto detect new relationships after data is loaded. If I uncheck that box, it will stop automatically creating relationships for future tables that I import. So I'll click OK at that point and then just return to the report view. Now, although the report is working with these two separate tables joined via the relationship between the year column, it is a little messy to have to deal with two separate tables and store the year column twice. It would be better if we merged these two queries into one single table. So to do that, let's head back to the Query Editor tool. If we click the top half of the Edit Queries button on the Home tab of the ribbon, what we can choose to do is merge our two queries into a single query using the Merge Queries button. What I'm going to do is click the drop down arrow just to the right of that button and choose to merge my queries as a new query. So rather than try to put data from one of the existing queries into an existing one, I'm going to create a brand new one out of the two. So I'll choose Merge Queries as New. And then when the dialog box appears, I get to choose which of my two tables I want to consider to be the left table, not that it really matters. And then secondly, which table I want to consider being the right table. So I've got Box Office Outside Top 100 and Box Office All Films. I need to choose which columns they're joined on, so I can click the year column in the first table and then the year column in the second table. Those are the columns which contain the matching values. I then get to choose which join type I want. Join types, if you're familiar with writing queries in SQL, you might have watched that video series that we have already. You'll be quite comfortable with the concept of left, right, full and inner joins. In this example, it really does not matter in the slightest which one we use. Both tables, the columns we're joining on, the year column contains 10 rows, each row has a unique value, and there's an exact match for each value in each table. So all of these options would give us essentially the exact same result. Apart from the anti-result, we don't want to exclude any rows at all. So either inner, full outer, right outer, or left outer will give us the same results. For this example, I suppose inner would probably make the most logical sense, I suppose. We're getting rows from both tables where the joined fields have a matching value. So let's just have that selected and then we can click OK. And we'll generate a brand new table called Merge1, which isn't particularly useful. We'll rename that in just a moment. First of all, we need to deal with getting the data from the second column into our main table. So you can see that the Box Office All Films data is currently compressed into a table value. We need to expand that out so that it populates the individual columns. So I can click the button sitting at the top of that Box Office All Films. And then when I do that, I can choose which columns I want to extract. The only one I really need here is the gross box office for all films. So I've already got the gross box office for the top 100, the films outside the top 100, and the number of releases and the year. So all I need is, if I just uncheck the select all columns box and then tick the gross box office box again, and then uncheck the use original column name. If I do this, if I don't uncheck this, it will say Box Office All Films gross box office pounds millions. So I'm going to uncheck that box and then click OK. I should rename these columns at least a little bit. You can see that I've got two columns which would have had exactly the same name. So the new one's been renamed with a 0.1 at the end of it. I should just indicate that this is gross box office outside top 100, and then that the new one is gross box office all films, just so we can distinguish those in the main query. Let's rename the table as well. So I don't want it to be called Merge1. I want this to be Box Office All Films versus Outside Top 100. Another fairly long name, but at least it will be nice and descriptive and obvious when we're using that in the report. So having done that, what I'm going to do now is load this data back into the main report. So I can click the Close and Load button. And when the changes have been applied, we should end up with, eventually, yet another new table sitting on the fields list on the right hand side. And if I quickly switch back to the model view, I'll see that I get that new table imported here as well. At this point, I don't really need my original two tables in the model at all. I'll recreate my visual to use my new table in a moment. I can get rid of these tables from the model in a couple of different ways. I could choose to hide them so that they simply don't appear in the report view. So I could right click on a table and choose hide in report view. So that would mean it would sort of remain grayed out in the data model, but I wouldn't be able to see it to select values from it in the fields list. Really, I don't need to see it in the data model at all. So what I can also choose to do is right click, and if I just unhide it, then I can right click and then choose to delete it from the model entirely. If I do that, I'll get asked if I want to confirm to do that, so I can click delete to confirm it. Then I'll get a warning that although I can delete it from the data model, it won't actually be deleted as a query. But that's okay as well. I can click OK. It's required as a query because it populates this merged table, so I can't delete it entirely from the file. But if I have a quick look back at the query editor to see what's happened there, if I go back to edit queries, and then you can see that the box office all films query is still there. It's just grayed out and its name has been italicized, indicating that it isn't being loaded into the final data model. I can do the same thing for the box office outside top 100 query as well. I can do this from the query editor by right clicking on it and just choosing to disable the load. So I can do that and then click continue, and that will remove it from the data model, and then that will be grayed out as well. I can't delete these entirely, and if you want to check which queries you can delete entirely, you can use the View tab in the ribbon in the query editor and click Query Dependencies. That will show you if I select my box office all films versus outside top 100, it shows me by highlighting in yellow all the dependent queries. So I need these original two. I can't remove them at all. Otherwise this final merged query couldn't exist. So let's close that one down. While I'm still in the query editor, I'd like to add a new calculated column to my new merged query. If I switch back to that one, I can see that I've got the gross box office for films outside the top 100 and the gross box office for all films. I'd like to subtract one from the other to get the gross box office for the top 100 films. So adding a new calculated column is pretty straightforward. From the Add Column tab of the ribbon, I can click Custom Column. The calculation here is fairly straightforward. Let me give my new column a name when the dialog box appears first. Let's call this Gross Box Office Top 100. And then when I've done that, I can click into the formula box, and then I can simply build up my formula by double clicking on a field in the list on the right hand side. So I'll go for the all films gross box office first, and then subtract from that the gross box office outside top 100. And that will give me the gross box office for films in the top 100. I've got a little green check indicating no syntax errors have been detected. So when I click OK, I should get my new column sitting there on the right hand side. The data type hasn't been detected properly. It's still confused as to whether that's text or numbers. So let's give it a helping hand by clicking on the symbol and then choose decimal number. Having done that, let's head back to the Home tab in the ribbon and click the Close and Apply button to apply all those changes back to the report. When that all takes place, we should see that our outside top 100 table disappears, and we're left just with the box office all films. Now that all that's been done, I can head back to the report view and recreate my visual, because the original one I added in will be completely broken because the fields it refers to no longer exist in the data model. So I can select that visual and just delete it. And then let's replace that with a basic clustered column chart this time. I can then add in the year field. Notice the year field has been set to summarize again, so I'm going to select it and then head to the modeling tab and then choose not to summarize it, so choose don't summarize, and then I'll add it into my chart by ticking the box, and it goes into the axis well in the field well. I then need to work out which of my gross box office fields to select. Let's just change the width of that column or that fields panel so I can see which one is which. I want to compare the gross box office for the top 100 films with the gross box office for films outside the top 100, just to see the discrepancy really in sort of how little of the market share the films outside the top 100 are competing for. The top 100 films overwhelm everything else. So there we go, some basic modelling to get a couple of tables merged together to create a single chart out of the two. Okay, so we've seen an example of merging tables. Let's have a look at appending tables next. If I switch back to the PDF file and have a look on page 7, I've got 3 separate tables side by side showing the number of admissions to the cinema in the UK since 1935 all the way up to 2017. But these are in 3 separate tables and I need them to be in one single continuous list in order to create a chart from them. So to make that work, let's head back to the report view and let's head back to the Home tab in the ribbon and choose to get data from a recent source, and we'll go for our PDF file again, of course. When this loads, we can look for page 7 on the left hand side, and there are 3 tables there available. So we've got table 14, 15 and 16. So if we check each of those 3 boxes, we can then choose to edit those rather than immediately load them, because they should all have nice new sensible names, and then they will all need to be appended into one single continuous list. So the first table I have here, table number 16, seems to be the one that starts in 1935 and ends at 62. So that looked like it was the first table to me in the PDF. So just go to show you can't always tell from a name what's in a table. Let's give it a sensible name. Let's call this UK ADM, short for admissions, 1935 to 1962. And then we can select one of the other tables, and this one's 91 to 2017. We could rename it over here in the properties window. It just seems a little more convenient to rename the query just by double clicking on it here. I'll call this UK ADM 1991 to 2017. And then the final one must be the one that sits in between. So that's the 1963 to 1990. So UK ADM, spell ADM properly, there we go, ADM, 1963 to 1990. Okay, so that's the 3 tables renamed. What I'd like to do now is put them all together into one single continuous list. And rather than doing that by merging queries, which essentially puts tables side by side, appending queries is what I want. This is kind of the equivalent of a union select statement in SQL terms. So with append queries, I'd like to put these together into a new query. So let's choose append queries as new. And then a dialog box will appear asking me which tables I want to include. I've definitely got 3 or more tables, so I can choose 3 or more tables. It gives me the first one I've got there, UK ADM 63 to 1990. Let's just include the other 2 by double clicking on them. And then I can simply click OK to have those added into one single continuous list. The reason this worked, of course, is because the same column names appeared in each of the tables and the same data types appeared in each of the 2 tables. So there's that consistency there in that table that allowed this to happen. Append 1's a fairly rubbish name for this. Let's call this UK, let's call it admissions 1935 to 2017. Sorry, 1035. I'm pretty sure cinema hadn't been invented then. It's 1935 to 2017. Let's rename that properly. There we go. It looks as though the data types are being detected correctly. So 1, 2, 3 whole numbers for the years and decimal numbers for the admissions. There's no real reason to have these 3 separate queries now being loaded into the data model. So let's right click on each of these and choose not to load them. So we can disable the load for each of these 3 separate queries. We've got the one that we do need. So we can right click, enable load. Okay, so having done that, we can click close and apply, and our UK admissions table, I've just noticed I've spelled UK with a lowercase k, and that will not do, so let me just correct that. And then let's close and apply those changes to end up with a brand new table, which will contain, eventually when it's loaded, all of the data for the years 1935 to 2017. There we go. We should just check that that hasn't created a relationship. We did disable the auto relationship creation, so we haven't inadvertently related those 2 tables, which would have made a bit of a mess, so we didn't have to manually delete that. As we've gone through the effort of getting the data into the report, let's create a basic visual to display it. If we head back to the report view, we can add a new page to the report by clicking the new page button down here at the bottom, and let's add in a basic stacked column chart. We can then add the year field into the axis box. It's set to automatically summarize. We don't need to change that, by the way. We don't need to go to the modeling tab and change the default summarization. We can always just drag the year field into the appropriate well in the field well. The changing the default summarization was just sort of to signal more intent, that we don't want to summarize the year. And if we were adding the year to multiple visuals throughout the report, it's tedious to have to always drag it to the correct box rather than rely on just checking the box. Anyway, let's have the year in the axis box and then just check the admissions box going into the value well. And then if we resize the chart, we can see kind of an interesting just fact in and of itself, I suppose. The fact that the UK cinema admissions peaked in 1946 and then rapidly dropped off just before the 60s and went even lower in the mid-80s, I guess, sort of VHS and Betamax and so on, home entertainment. And they sort of gradually increased slowly, nowhere near the levels it used to be, of course, but then it's remained reasonably steady over the past sort of decade or two. Anyway, I kind of find that sort of stuff interesting, but there we go. There's our basic appended data displayed in a visual. Okay, let's have a look at a slightly different type of table that we can import and mold into a fashion that we can use it in visuals. Let's get back to the PDF file and find in page number 9. We've got it's a chart, but it's got a table sitting below it. And this table shows us essentially the average revenue per release for different years. The problem is the data's in the wrong format. I wanted to have the years listed down the left-hand side of my table, and then gross box office, number of releases, and average revenue should be the column headings. So to get the data into that form, let's have a look at how we can do that with Power BI. If we head back to the report first of all and choose to get data from a recent source, so we'll go for the PDF file again, and then we can look for page number 9 when the navigator appears. And let's scroll down. There's a couple of tables on page number 9. Let's have a quick look. That's not the one I want, so it's the second one there, table 21. That's the one I need. So I can check the box and then click the edit button to launch the query editor again, and then see how we can sort this data out to mold it into an appropriate form for our report. What we need to do here is, as I said, we need to take the row of data containing years and convert that into a column of years, and then the column of headers sitting down the left hand side here into the column headings for revenue, for gross box office, number of releases, and average revenue. If that sounds really difficult, it really genuinely isn't. It's essentially a single click, or maybe 2 clicks. If I click the transform tab first of all and then click the transpose button, there you go, there's your 2 clicks. It really is that simple, quite nicely. We've got a bit of more tidying up to do, I suppose. We should promote our column headers and then just make sure they're all named correctly. So we know how to do that. We can actually promote the column headers from the transform tab here. So use first row as headers. And then we can rename the year column. So we'll call that year, of course. And we'll just change this to gross box office £M, and then number of releases, and then average revenue per release, or AVG rev per release. There we go, bit of a shorthand there. Okay, all the data types look sound. We've got 1.2, so decimal numbers, whole numbers, decimal numbers, whole numbers, all that looks great. We don't have any rogue data to delete, so that's the whole thing. We should just rename the table or the query, so let's double click on it on the left hand side. Let's call this revenue per release, and then hit enter to rename it, and then we can head back to the home tab, click the close and apply button, and load that query into the data model. Once that's happened, we should see a new table appear on the right hand side in the field list as usual, and a quick look at the model view to check that that has appeared as well there. Perfect, not been joined up or related to any of the tables. So at this point we could head to the report view, we could add a new page, and then we could produce a basic chart which describes or shows that data. Let's go with a line and clustered column this time. And again, I'm going to add the year into the axis box, and then I'm going to add in the gross box office and number of releases into the column series. So gross box office, number of releases. Sorry, beg your pardon, column series. I meant to put that in column values. I beg your pardon, column values. And then I'm going to put in the average revenue per release into the line values. And if I just change the size of that chart, the line series again is starting at the lowest value of the line, so 1.5. It looks like there's nothing happening there. So I'm getting 0 revenue per release in 2014 and 2016. So let's just edit the start point of the secondary y-axis. So with the chart selected, we can head to the Format tab, expand the y-axis card, and then scroll downwards to find the secondary y-axis or the y-axis line and set its start to be at 0, which should just raise the line up and make things a little more readable. So the transpose option is pretty cool when the table you want to import is in the wrong orientation, but sometimes transpose by itself isn't quite sufficient. If we switch back to the PDF and have a look at page 5 this time, if I scroll upwards to page 5, there's a table in here which shows the cinema admissions per month between 2013 and 2017. So the table here has the month names as column headers and then the years as row headers. Transposing this isn't quite sufficient. All we'd do is we'd flip the years into the column headers and the months into the row headers. What I really want to do is create a separate row for the 12 months in 2013, a separate row for the 12 months in 2014. So we'd have 12, 24, 36, 48. We'd have 60 rows in total in the data set. So to make that work, let's head back to the report and let's get some more data using recent sources, BFI Film at the Cinema. And we'll start by importing that table on page number 5. And then when we've got that, let's have a quick look. That's not quite the right one. So that's page 4, beg your pardon. I looked at the wrong thing. That was table 5 on page 4. So table 10 on page 5. If I check that box and then click edit to launch the query editor, and then we can have a look at how we can solve the problem of getting all this data in the form we need. Okay, just to show that transpose won't do what we need in this case, let's head to the transform tab. Just before we transpose it, I want to bring the current column headers down into the first row of data. So I can do that in a couple of ways. I'm going to do it by demoting the headers. So I'll use the first row as headers, click the drop down arrow and then say use headers as first row. Having done that, I can then transpose the table just to show you that I get a separate row for each month, but it's moved the years into the column headers. I mean, this is slightly better. It would mean that I could drag 5 individual years into a visual rather than 12 individual months, but it's still not quite good enough. So let's just undo those changes we made. I'm going to delete those individual steps all the way back to demoted headers. And then let's look at the real solution to this. We'll look at unpivoting some columns. Before we do the unpivoting, let's just rename the first column and call it year. And then if I scroll along to the right hand side of the table, there's also a rogue total column, which I don't want at all. So I'm going to right click and remove that column. Then I'll scroll back along to the left hand side and just highlight the year column. And then what I'm going to do is look for the unpivot columns in the transform tab. What I want to do is unpivot all the other columns except for the one that I've got selected. So the second option there, unpivot other columns. If I click that option, that's the one that will spit out each separate month name next to each separate year name. So I got 12 rows for 2013, 12 for 2014, and so on. At this point, I can just rename the attribute column so that that's called month. And I should rename the value column as well so that that's called admissions. Admissions M for millions. And then I can just close and load this, assuming the data types look correct. So I've got 1, 2, 3 for the year, text for the month, and decimal for the admissions. Let's just rename the table as well. Let's call this UK monthly admissions. I'll get that spelled correctly eventually. UK monthly admissions. And then having done that, let's head back to the Home tab and click Close and Apply, and then have a new page when this is loaded. We'll have a new page in which to create a basic visual. So I can click the plus button to create a new page. I'll create a line chart this time, and I'll add the line chart in. And then I want to add in the month as the x-axis, so I can add month to the axis there. And then I want to have admissions in millions as the line, and then I want to separate that into different series using the year. So I'll drag the year to the legend, and that looks like a bit of a higgledy-piggledy mess to me. The main reason it's a bit of a mess is because of the sorting. The sorting's gone in descending order of value. I can change the sort order of my chart by using the More Options button in the top right-hand corner here. So first of all, I want to choose to sort by month rather than by admissions. So let's choose month first of all, and then I'll choose to sort in ascending order of month as well. And that still looks like a bit of a mess. The reason it's a bit of a mess, of course, is because sorting the month names, which are text values, sorts alphanumerically. So I get April first and September last, because alphabetically, that's how those months are sequenced. What we need to do is find a way to sort our months in chronological order. Now, there are lots of different possible solutions to this problem. One way would be to import a new table containing a list of the month names followed by the numeric value of the month, which we could then create a relationship to the UK monthly admissions table and then choose to sort by the month number rather than by the month name. We could also use a DAX expression in the data view. We could add a new calculated column to work out the number of the month from the text. But what we're going to do, because we've done everything else in the query editor, let's look at a solution in the query editor. There's two possible solutions I can think of just roughly off the top of my head. Let's head back to the Edit Queries tool, and then let's have a look at the UK monthly admissions table. The first really quick, simple, low-tech solution to this, and it really is a low-tech solution, is to head to the Add Column tab and then choose to add column from examples. That gives you the opportunity to start writing in an example value next to each row and try to let the query editor, Power Query, work out what you're trying to do. So, for example, what I could do here is next to the first row, that's January, so that should be the number 1. And then let's see on the next row, if I hit enter, the next row is February, so that should be the number 2. And then the next row is number 3 and 4 and 5. And yes, I really am doing this, typing in the actual numbers one by one. I said it was a low-tech solution, didn't I? When I get to the end of the 12th month, I've got the pattern filled in starting on the next row. So it starts again 1 through 12. And the reason it does this, the way it works, is it thinks that what I'm trying to do is create a custom if function. So if the month is equal to the word January, then provide the number 1. Else, if the month is equal to the February, then the number 2, and so on and so on and so on, all the way through the 12 months. That's a pretty horrible way to do it, but it does work. And if you're happy with that solution, you could click OK. But that's, I don't know, that's not that satisfying, is it? Just typing in a list of numbers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cancel that and look at a slightly better solution using an expression by creating a new custom column using the expression builder. So let's click custom column first of all. There's 2 steps to this. The first step is to generate a complete date which combines the month name that I've created here. Now again, this is something we could do using the column from examples, but I'm going to do it here using the query editor, the custom column generator. Let's change this so that it's called, let's call this a complete date first of all. And then we'll build up the first step of this by using a function. So we're going to look at the date namespace, date dot from text. And this function here allows us to put together a string of text which can then be interpreted as a date. If I just zoom in so you can see this a little more clearly. The first bit of text, this is going to be the number of the day of the month. So in a set of double quotes, I'm going to put in the number 1 followed by a space. Then after the double quotes, I'm going to use an ampersand to concatenate that with the name of the month column. So if I look for the month column in a set of square brackets there. So that will make 1 January for the first row, 1 February for the second row, and so on. then I can concatenate that with something that looks like a year. So let's go with this year. Let's go with 2019. So the first row will say 1 January 2019, the second row will say 1 February 2019, and so on and so on and so on. So if I close the round brackets there and then just hit OK, we'll see that we get a complete date worked out from the individual month names. Now the reason I've done that is so that I can use a function which requires a date value to extract the month from. So I'm actually going to go back to this added custom option by clicking the cog icon on the right hand side. And then I'm going to change the column name so that it's called, let's call it month number. And then what I'm going to do is wrap around this function. If I just click before the date, I'm going to wrap around this current expression a new expression that's date dot month. So the date dot month function requires a complete date. If I open up some round brackets, and then at the end of that line, I can just close an extra set of round brackets. And that will generate the month number from that bit of text. If I click OK, we'll see that we get 1 for January through 12 for December. I know we get the exact same results, and it probably took just as long to write the formula as it did to just write out the list of numbers 1 through 12, but it's just a little bit more satisfying, a little bit more elegant doing things that way. Let's make sure the month number is set to be a whole number, so I can do that by changing the data type. And then having done that, let's close and load this query back into the data model. And when that has finally loaded, there we go. There's one last thing we need to do. I still want to display my month name in the chart, but I want the month name to be sorted by the month number. So to make that work, what I need to do is select the month column in the table. I can do this either in the table or in the fields list, and then head to the modeling tab in the ribbon. And from here, I can choose to change the sort by for the month column. So I've got sort by column. By default, it's sorted by itself. It's sorted by the month column, but I want to sort this column by the new month number column that I've created. So if I choose month number, and then if I switch back to the report view, I should now find that my chart has sorted as if by magic chronologically by month name. So there we go. There's a bunch of different techniques used to extract data from a PDF file and then transform it to make it usable in a report. Bear in mind that a lot of the techniques we looked at there in the query editor will apply to any sort of data source. It's not just purely about PDFs, so you should find a lot of those techniques useful in the real world. Hopefully you will. Thanks for watching. See you next time.